Every 4 years, Americans go to the polls to elect the next president. It's a spectacle for the whole planet, but we're betting there are things you don't know about the process of electing a president. Let's take a look at the top 5 fun facts about the American elections. The United States has the longest-standing democracy in the world. Since 1776, when the country declared independence, 44 different presidents led the country. In 2016, more than 130 million Americans voted. Marked by social unrest and a pandemic, the 2020 election has been perceived as the most extraordinary in history. But hold on, the American elections have rarely been less crazy. There are facts that will surprise you. Here are our top 5. Number 5. Astronauts can actually vote from space. Yep, it's also possible to vote from orbit. This is doable because, in most cases, the astronaut's home is Houston, and a 1997 Texas law allows them to vote from space. The first American to vote in space was David Wolf in 1997. He voted in a local Texas election from the now-defunct Russian space station, Mir. But how does the voting system in space work? Well, it's actually quite simple. First, astronauts need to fill out a federal postcard application, and when approved, the county where they are registered sends the ballots to NASA. The ballots are actually PDF files and encrypted emails. Before sending it to the astronauts, NASA tests the process to see if everything works. If the test is successful, the ballots are sent to the astronauts on Election Day. Then they select the candidate they want and email the ballot back to NASA, who forwards it to the county. Once it reaches its final destination, a clerk opens the file and writes in on a paper ballot. That clerk is actually the only person who knows how the astronaut voted. Number 4. The last president elected from a different party was in 1850. The American election is also a synonym of the battle between Democrats and Republicans. It wasn't always like this. In total, out of 45 presidential terms, 11 belonged to a different party other than Democrat or Republican. Millard Fillmore, a member of the Whig Party, was the 13th president of the United States and governed between 1850 and 1853. He was the last not to be affiliated with either the Democratic or Republican parties. 4 American presidents were affiliated with the Whig Party, which was one of the 2 main political forces in the country between 1830 and 1850, together with the Democratic Party. The Federalists also saw some glorious times in the beginning. The first president, George Washington, although independent, was sympathetic to the Federalist agenda. Famous Federalists include Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, the second president. The Democratic-Republican Party, not the ones from today, was the opposition to the Federalists. Its most famous member was Thomas Jefferson. Different from the Federalists, the Democratic-Republican was opposed to a centralized government and championed the rights of states. Democratic-Republican presidents, besides Jefferson, include James Madison, James Monroe, and John Quincy Adams. Since Fillmore ascended to the presidency in 1853, no third-party candidate has ever repeated the feat. But in every election, there are always candidates from other parties trying to get to the White House. And although no one has ever come close in recent years, their impact cannot be underestimated. In 2000, for example, when George Bush won, the Green Party candidate Ralph Nader got 2.8 million votes, 2.74% of the total. In a very close election like that, Nader was accused of deciding the election for having taken support away from the Democratic candidate Al Gore in several key states, especially Florida, where Gore lost by 537 votes, and Nader had 97,488 votes. Similar accusations faced Green Party candidate Jill Stein in 2016. Aside from the Green Party, the last elections had also candidates from the Libertarian Party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the Constitution Party, and also independent candidates. Number 3. Whoever gets more votes doesn't necessarily win. Yes, it's weird for the rest of the world, but a loser can actually be a winner in the American elections. That's thanks to the Electoral College system, a body of legislative officials that directly elects the president. The number of votes in the Electoral College is allocated based on the population of each state. For example, California, the most populated state, has the right to 55 votes in the Electoral College, while North Dakota gets only 3. To understand why the system works this way, we need to go back to the beginning of the United States, more precisely to 1776, when the country declared independence. Back then, the Founding Fathers struggled for months to decide how the system could work. Among many worries, they were afraid that with a popular vote system, candidates would focus only on big cities, ignoring the rural areas. Also, they actually didn't trust the average citizen to make this call. It was 1776. The country didn't even officially exist. It was very divided, uneducated, rural. Politicians didn't believe asking the people would be the best idea. With many disagreements, the representatives of the states had different opinions about how the president should be elected. And there was a risk that states not willing to have a popular vote would not ratify the Constitution. The Electoral College system turned into a compromise. So fast forward to the present, and the average American at the polling booth is actually not voting for a president, but for electors who choose the president. And contrary to the national system, most states have a winner-takes-all votes approach. There are only 2 exceptions, Nebraska and Maine. So how many votes does a candidate need to get elected? He or she needs 270, or a majority of the 538 electoral votes. How did they come up with 538? 435 represents the number of Congress members, 100 the number of senators, and the remaining 3 are the electors representing Washington, D.C. If there's an electoral college deadlock, or if no candidate receives the majority of votes, there is a contingent election, when the House of Representatives is responsible to elect the new president. This happened only twice in history, in 1800 and 1824. It has happened 5 times that a candidate has won the popular vote and still lost an election. Andrew Jackson in 1824, Samuel Tilden in 1876, Grover Cleveland in 1888, Al Gore in 2000, and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And this is not the only difference about US elections. The voting rate in the country is actually one of the lowest in the developed world. Only 56% of eligible US voters cast ballots in the 2016 presidential election. This puts the USA in 26th place out of 32 OECD countries. Number 2. It's an old men billionaire game. Presidential elections are very expensive. The campaign pays for staff, transportation, events, and, of course, advertising. And the budgets get bigger and bigger. In 2016, Donald Trump raised $433.3 million, while Hillary Clinton raised $769.8 million. Unbelievable amounts, which were easily topped by 2020 budgets. In August 2020 alone, Joe Biden's campaign raised a staggering $364.5 million, a historic record as it exceeded any single month of fundraising from previous presidential elections. Although official numbers were still not published, there are reports that he surpassed the $365 million record in September. During the first public Trump versus Biden television debate, Biden's campaign cash flow reached a never-seen-before peak. His campaign announced that it raised $8 million just between 9 and 11 p.m. On the following day, Rufus Gilbert, deputy campaign manager for Biden, tweeted, "Never before in my 16-plus year political career have I received more calls, texts, emails from people wanting to give money to the campaign than I have in the last 12 hours. And it's not only the amount of money spent that is rising in 2020. The candidates have never been this old. Regardless of who wins the White House, a record will be broken. Either 77-year-old Joe Biden will be the oldest candidate to win a first-term presidency ever, or 74-year-old Trump will be the oldest second-term president ever. Trump already holds the record of the oldest elected president in his first term. He was 70 years old when elected. Number 1. The elections were not really democratic for a long time. Although the Declaration of Independence specified that all men are created equal in 1776, voting rights were limited to certain groups for a long time. Women, African Americans, and Native Americans had to fight long, hard fights for the right to vote. Women were allowed to vote just after the 19th Amendment was ratified on August 18, 1920. It was added to the Constitution 8 days later. But it was a long and hard-fought battle. Although it's impossible to determine when a movement began, the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention is usually accepted as the starting point of what would end up being a series of reforms that gave women the right to vote. It was during the convention in the northern New York town that a group of women got together and put forth a series of demands, including the right to vote. The 19th Amendment is to this day considered the single largest extension of voting rights in American history. An estimated 26 million American women gained the right to vote with its approval. The passing of the 19th Amendment was not the end of the voting rights struggle for other minorities. Racism was widespread in America, especially in the form of the Jim Crow policies, which excluded African American people from the polls by requiring literacy tests, poll taxes, and other obstacles. Physical threats and intimidation were also routine in many states and kept African Americans from voting. Officially, since 1870, the 15th Amendment of the Constitution gave African American men the right to vote. Actually, it stated that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Seeing loopholes in this sentence, many states, especially in the South, implemented a series of preconditions for voting, barring most African American men from the polls. This was also the reality for African American women after the 19th Amendment was passed. The African American population was not able to see the end of the Jim Crow laws and its effect on everyday lives until 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was approved. Native Americans also had their own struggles. It was not until the approval of the 1924 Indian Citizenship Act, also known as the Snyder Act, that they were recognized as full U.S. citizens. Until then, Native Americans were not allowed to vote. They suffered similar obstacles as African Americans. Even after the act was approved, state legislation was invented to make it harder for Native Americans to vote. The situation would improve in 1965 with the approval of the Voting Rights Act. So that's it for this video. We hope you enjoyed learning more about the American elections. Since you made it to the end, stick around. Click on our other videos and keep watching. We hope you liked our video and subscribe to our channel.